Okay, we have speed. Molly, anytime you're ready.
Okay. Well, first of all, I've got to congratulate you on the other night, here in this building, actually, somewhere, to have this sort of almost like a private concert of 300 or 400 people. How did you feel being back doing the East Street Band?
It's great, you know. I think that we played a couple of, I guess it was a month ago, so in a little bar here in New York, and in the course of when we were shooting the video, and it was interesting because the sort of imprint of all the music that we play together is always, it's really actually, it's right at your fingertips. You know, you think you don't remember it, but you count off a song, you get into it, and it just comes back, you know. But it was pretty interesting. I think it's a different, you know, we haven't had the experience of playing together in about, I guess, 8 years or so. It's been, you know, 7 or 8 years, and it's such a complex group of people, and our history together is so deep at this point, and also everybody's grown into men and women, and we were, you know, kids when we started, and so there's this long history, long emotional history, and the separation, and so there's a lot you sort of carrying around on stage with you, but it still feels, you know, there's something. I think I'm able to do something particular with that group of people that is different, and something I'm not able to do, like if I'm solo or on my own or something. It's about a lot of that history together, and about a certain sort of, they sort of broaden in some way my musical perspective, you know, just by being there, you know, because hey, that's the guy that was there when you were 20, and you know, remember he got divorced and he went through these problems, and you saw people had babies, and so and also the music basically, it maps our lives in some fashion, you know, all the different parts. So you bring quite a bit on stage, and it's a good band. It was again, one of the nicest things was a band where everybody actually really liked one another, you know.
It was actually quite funny, for a peculiar feeling for being in the audience, because it was sort of like, and for someone that's followed Bruce and the East Street Band for such a long time, it's almost like you were a next-door neighbour watching this family that you'd seen grow up get together, and you're peering through the window and seeing them have actually a good time of getting back together again.
I think that was the importance of the band. The band was a tangible bridge between my work and my audience. They were a physical manifestation of the community that I wrote about, and they brought my work to life in a very particular way. And I think over the years they became very deeply symbolic. In pop world is a world of symbology, and sort of partly intentionally and partly just the time that we spent together, the presence of the band became a very just important and symbolic one for my audience, which is, and for me also, you know, which I sort of realized when we just started to play together again, that there was a certain world that gets created when we're together, and I think that people do feel about it like you expressed. I think people sort of, somebody up there, you recognize everybody up there, and you have some corollary in your own life, you know, about the way you feel about this friend or that friend, or you know, everybody has some. And so it was, for me, it was, they were the tangible, the physical evidence of the community that I wrote about. You know, they were the physical representation of that community, because a musician's life basically is very transient. We do a lot of, you know, travel around a lot. We were all away from our parents, you know, young, and so that sort of ends up, I think the community that I dreamed about in my songs, they ended up sort of physically representing,
Mm.
and in that way they opened and broadened the scope of my work when we played together. So it was
Well, even sort of observing Patty up the back, she was looking down at times when you all seemed to be getting it together and having fun and charging on. She looked down like the mother, very happy with the children, that they're all getting along so fine, you know.
Yeah, you know, it's what it is the roles. I mean, it's just such a complicated situation, you know, and the people themselves are very unusual and complex people, and just take Patty and I, we've gone through so many changes since she got in the band, you know.
Yeah.
She just got in the band as a singer, and now we get on stage. She's my wife, and we have the kids together, and in some way it makes a certain sort of sense, you know, because it was, I don't know, there was some way. It's funny because it was different, and everybody is older, and like I said, everybody's men and women now on stage, but there was something really, it felt right, you know. It felt like, yeah, like, hey, 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road, you felt like it made, you looked around, and I think people, I would wish that everybody was as lucky to have as good a group of friends surround them.
Sure.
As you know, at this point in their lives, you know. So it was a good thing. It was a good thing, and the separation sort of made it more. You know, the time we were apart, that was. It sort of made everything very, very real again. You know, I'd gotten to.
It must make it stronger as well, actually.
Yeah, well, I'd gotten to a place, I think, in '86 or '87, where I felt like, with the band, I said, gee, I don't know what to do next with this group of people. I don't know what I want to do next or I'm going to do next. And we spent some of the guys 20 years together. I said, hey, you know, I just gotta go out and see what happens next, you know. And it was a difficult thing, but it's sort of, and we didn't, you know, I called the guys and said, gee, I said, well, you know, I'm going to go out and do some work. I want to work with some other musicians. I've never done that, and the rest of them, you know, had never done it before, and I said, I don't really know what's going to happen next. Who knows? You know, and it was tough. People were, you know, I mean, everybody went through a wide range of emotions and feelings, but we stayed pretty in touch over the years in between, and so it was pretty sweet. It was nice. Yeah.
The other night, there's been many songs of yours that either hit the soul, the heart, or the mind. And I think a listener of the songs, when they hear them, can have their own interpretation of what the song's about and what it may mean to them personally. And many of your songs have hit me in all those places. To see you perform the other night and to hear Streets of Philadelphia, it brought tears to my eyes. I mean, from my friends, people I've known, etc., etc. And it is so beautifully done on stage, the way you did it the other night, you know. I mean, you wouldn't have performed that many times live on stage, would you have? Apart from...
Except for like that was the only time we've ever performed a song. We've never performed it out, you know, in front of just an audience in that fashion, you know. So, and I think we'd played it maybe like once or twice before, you know. It's a simple song. There's nothing to it, but it kind of ties into the whole sort of body of stuff that I think, you know, that that I've written about over the years in some fashion, you know. And I think it's a good song to play actually with the band, because the band sort of always, I think when I went back when we got together again, it was the band, when I sat down to think about the band and think about writing for the band, that for some reason my thoughts into writing in a more social area, you know, and that was the group of people that I always did that with, you know.
Sure.
And so they played pretty well. They played pretty well.
Bringing to the album, the Greatest Hits album, it must have been pretty hard. I mean, there's 18 tracks on this album, and some new ones as well, to come up with a list. Because I know how you go through lists from way back of how you've altered things around in albums and.
Well, John Landau came up with a list, so he gets to take the glory or the blame. You know?
Right.
But actually, it was what we tried to do was the idea was a singles collection, with the exception of Thunder Road. I think everything else was a single. We weren't able to get all of them on because the first two records were Blinded by the Light, and I think Spirit Night.
I was going to say with Greetings, there's nothing from Greetings.
And the second record, I don't know if we ever even had a single off that record, but so it was sort of
New York City's Serenade's a great song.
Yeah, I don't think we ever put anything out. In those days, the chances of getting on any sort of commercial radio were next to none, you know. So basically, I think it was pretty. He read off that list of songs, and I think with the exception of. And we had Prove It All Night in there at one point, and we might have put Badlands in there instead. It was pretty similar to what we initially came up with. But we knew it was going to be a thing where, you know, everybody wants their favorites on, and
sure.
It's a no-win situation. But I wanted a record that a young fan, as they could go in to the store, could buy, get a taste of all the work that was done over the past 20 years or so. And you know, learn a little bit about the band and get a feeling for some of the music, you know, without having to go back and get all the other records and things.
Well, if we can just go through the tracks as they sit. Now, Born to Run, from the Born to Run sessions, which was, 1975. The song itself, I read so much about this song, of your feelings about this song, and you're actually doing that particular album. I get the feeling that at times you found it really hard doing this album. At times you hated doing this album.
I was young and really insecure, and you know, one day you think you're the greatest, and the next minute you think you know, everything was worthless, and so you were. I think there were a lot. Your emotions were all over the place at the time, and like I said, before I'd made a record, I'd never met anybody who made an album. So it was, I made the Greetings from Asbury Park and Wild and Innocent. They had sort of very, I don't even know if you would call it modest success. You know, they sold a little bit, you know, but not much.
I've got them.
Yeah, and so there was a lot of pressure and a lot of stress during those sessions. Partly because I was trying to come up with something that felt like it was going to be uniquely mine, you know. And I never considered myself, I wasn't a revolutionary, say, like Bob Dylan or Elvis. I was synthesizing a lot of different elements and trying to pull them together, things that I wanted to get on my records, you know. I wanted the exhilaration of some of the best rock and roll records. I wanted the music to be physical, but I wanted it to have some sense of the intellect also. And so we were trying to I was trying to get everything that I ever knew or ever heard of onto one record. You know, I didn't know. I said, hey, this may be my last shot. You know, I think I had a 3-album deal. This was my 3rd album. You never knew. You didn't know if you were ever going to make another record again. So you wanted to make that one really count. And in some way, I think some of the sense of that is where the record pushes to go over the top or goes over the top. There was that sort of kind of desperation behind it, you know.
All right, with the song itself, with your songwriting, I mean, do you write a song and sometimes just put it aside, and then you take parts of that song and make it into another song, like with Born to Run?
Trying to think. I'm not sure how that song came. I know that song came about very slowly.
Well, the Violent Ones, a song called The Violent Ones, seem to have parts of Born to Run in it.
Really?
Yeah.
Who did the record?
yourself. I mean, there was a song called The Violent Ones that you
You're
did.
kidding me.
No.
I don't remember it.
Yeah. Well, had
I'd like
a
to
bit of
hear it.
Border Run, a
It's
bit
a
of
good
Jungle
title.
Land.
I'd like to hear it. But really, I didn't. You know, I don't. Was it on a bootleg?
Yeah,
It's gotta be, right?
it's on your 72, 75 songs that were done, you know.
It had parts of Born to Run in it.
Seemed to have, yeah.
That's interesting. I don't even remember the title. I usually remember everything, but I don't really. It might have, because what would
The
happen?
Wild Angels, it was called at one stage.
It probably did metamorphose out of. I mean, Thunder Road was like twice as
Yeah.
long at one point, and I know there's bootlegs of that out there, you know. But it probably metamorphosed out of some other thing, you know, because there was a period in between. I mean, I was, you know, at the time I was kind of getting dogged with the new Bob Dylan thing, you know, and I was trying to sort of, hey, you know, every musician works to create their, you know, your own vision in some fashion.
You're a great Dylan
So-
fan, right?
Oh man, still am, you know. He's
Well, is it true your mum, and when you first heard Dylan, said he can't sing?
yeah, it was on the, you know, it was like it was an interesting moment, because it was up until then we'd really agreed about. She was a big rock and roll fan, and mostly 50s and early 60s, and we'd agreed almost about everything. And then that was where there was the beginning, which that was the intent, I think, of his records, because he sang in a way that simply wasn't allowed on the radio previously. You couldn't hear it, and so he fundamentally changed the way that pop singers could sound, you know, and opened the open the airwaves to all different and types of voices, and more regional voices and more unique voices, in similar to the way I think that, like, say, Smells Like Teen Spirit here in the States, I don't know, did for this noisy. All of a sudden, you could have the noisy guitars and you could sing. Those are both really. They were both records that changed the way that changed the rules of the game. He came in, he changed the rules of the game. Nirvana changed the rules of the game also. I think those were so that was something we disagreed about at the time, but it was a good break for me, you know, because at the time I was struggling to sing at all and get the sound of my voice on the record. But that was we worked really hard on that record. In the end, I wanted to throw it out after I almost didn't put it out, you know.
I heard. I mean, you virtually were going to go back and do a live album down at the bottom line and say.
Yeah, I
incredible,
just,
right?
you know, I don't know what I was thinking.
Well, did you lack of confidence in yourself, or pressure, or what?
Probably. It was the only thing I was really sure about was when we played. It felt really true, you know, and I didn't really know how to make records. Nobody really knew how to make records. You know, we never.
But was that a good thing, do you think? I mean, in retrospect, I mean, the fact that it is raw in that sense.
What was good about it was it made for very eccentric sounds, and with sounds which, in the end, I mean, that particular record doesn't sound like any other record, you know. And I've never made another record that sounds like that, you know. I don't know if I'd even know how to go about it, but the fact that we were going in. And actually, the record I was listening to at the time was Nils Lofgren's first solo album. He had a solo album that came out before Born to Run, and it was pretty influential. You know, the way the drums sounded and just the purity of the rock and roll that he had on there. So we were kind of in there just feeling around. I mean, we were struggling to play in time, and we were struggling to just be musicians in some sense, you know, and also we'd set a much higher standard for what we were trying to do, I think, than we did on our earlier records. You know, we wanted it to sound a certain way. You know, John Landau, it's when he became my producer and we became friends, and he was very influential in Streamline. He had a very specific and almost austere sort of sound he thought the band could sound like, you know. And so it was very collaborative, and I was very unsure about allowing anyone else's influence on what I was doing, because, like, you're young and you're afraid, hey, somebody's going to change it and it's not going to be you, you know. So there was all kinds of and stress and pressure going on, and, you know.
Well, I mean, you have two tracks on this on the Greatest Hits album from the Born to Run sessions. I mean, Thunder Road as well.
Right.
And like a 24 at the time. And quote, and maybe a misquote, I was saying with Born to Run, you want to make a great rock and roll record.
Oh yeah, I wanted to make like the greatest one I thought would ever be made. You know, I was really had plenty of arrogance and ambition in that area. You know, I wanted to. You know, I was rolling all the dice. You know, and so I wanted to do something that felt definitive, that was going to be definitive in some fashion, and so we were. I had my sights set on a pretty big target. You know?
Now, writing the song, say Thunder Road, was that originally called Glory Road?
No, that title sounds familiar too.
I think it may.
Is that another bootleg?
No. I think it was originally going to be called Glory Land. You had it as Glory Land, and then became Thunder Road.
Yeah, that'd be right. You know.
And that was you took what from a Robert Mitchum movie. The basic idea.
No,
of it?
Thunder Road came from a Robert Mitchum picture, Thunder Road, which was a very strange and eccentric. It's a picture that he put together himself. I think he might have produced it himself. He actually sings the title song.
He sings it?
And I think he even wrote the title song. There's a recording of him. And it's actually a very good picture about the running moonshine down in the southern United States in the 50s. And it's a sort of film noir-y, and he's fantastic in it. And his son is in it also, and I think he plays his brother. And I was a big Mitchum fan, you know, big Robert Mitchum fan, and I just liked the sound of it. I wanted our band to sound like thunder. I wanted that kind of to feel that sort of power, you know. And so I'm not sure if that started out as Glory Road or not, but I know it came. The title came out of the Mitchum picture. So.
Now you're also saying that in that particular song that you try to do sort of like a more Roy Orbison type of vocal.
Oh, yeah. Well, I tried to sing really full voiced, you know, and out of my chest because I was fanatically listening to Roy Orbison at the time, and I mean his vocal power. It was just. There's never been another. There never will be another voice like that. You know.
Yet your voice, when you sing together, I mean, what was the feeling of you both performing together in the end?
Oh, that was a kick.
That
was a kick for me. You know, it was.
I mean, I love that particular version too.
Yeah, that was just. You know, I mean, he was just one of my heroes for so long, and he's a very sweet and very generous man, very very kind man, and very thoughtful and he was very generous with me. We knew each other for a short time. He was just very generous with me. He was quite a guy.
All right, now the third track, which is Badlands, we shift on to the next album after Born to Run. With Born to Run, it elevated you. Were you surprised how, when it hit the market, how it elevated you into another planet, really?
Yeah, there was the shock of success, I guess, and.
You seem to shy away from it.
Well...
Or did it frighten you?
Yeah, of course. It's a thing where, I mean, you pursue it on some level. I mean, I made the music I wanted to make, and we made it uncompromisingly, but at some point, and you pursue the success, and you want your work to have impact, you want to reach an audience. I believed in rock music as popular music, as music that it was worth. It was that something happened when a good record reached a large audience. There was some people found in all their differences. They found there was some common ground, you know.
Sure.
And all my favorite records were big hit records, all the Motown records and the Dylan records and the great soul records, and they were records I heard on the radio, and they were music for, you know, it was music for the people, for everybody, you know. And I wanted that type of impact, and I wanted to see what I would do, where I would take it in that arena, you know. But it was the first time it hits you and you realize that you're going to have this opportunity, which you don't know till then, you know. I mean, I knew I'd always be a musician, but I didn't know I would have the opportunity to try to play it out like that, you know. It's very frightening because the first thing that happens is it feels very destabilizing. There's a lot more people in your life. And also, you know, your music is about some fundamental part of yourself, you know, which you're taking and you're putting it out there, and it gets sold, and all of a sudden, what it is there's a dynamic that occurs that you don't have the control over, you know, until that it has a life of its own. It takes things happen back to you, many of which are wonderful, and some of which you would rather do without. You know? You want your music to have power and impact, and yet the intrusion into your privacy is always a drag. You know, and so you try to find a balance. And in the beginning, finding that balance is like if you've never stepped onto a surfboard for the first time. You know? In 6 months or a year, but at that first day you're up, you're down, you're all over the place, and that's what it feels like. You know, you're trying to find some center of balance, and yet every day, daily, there's something that's throwing you. And in that sense, when I had the thing that I did have around me was I had the E Street Band, a group of friends. Whenever we went, and we were people we hadn't traveled. You know, I traveled in cars across the country a little bit, but we had never been out of the United States. We were, all of us grew up in small towns, and just being on all the different places was disorienting. And so I carried like some of the neighborhood, and they were a very stabilizing force. So I could always turn, when something got, you know, you'd walk down the street and I'd see some big poster and I'd go, oh no, you know, but that's my response. Somebody else probably should have jumped for joy, you know, but at the time I was very, very frightened of, I hadn't had a chance to establish myself. I was frightened of my music being co-opted, used in some fashion, sold in a way that I felt wasn't true to what it was about. And I was working very, very hard and very intently on attempting to have as much control over that as I could at the time. And it was very difficult. It's a challenge for all new young bands when they take that step from all of a sudden, you know, into that sort of public spotlight.
I mean, being such as you were an Elvis fan, and you've said that he showed a person what to do and what not to do. Did you think back then, my God, they're making me, you know, so big that I may not be able to control it, like Elvis in the end could not, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't know if you can control, you don't know if you can control yourself, you know? Forget about everything else. You're worried about what you're going to do, you know? And so, yeah, you do feel like it's, you know, when it's new, particularly, and even years later when it happened 10 years after that, and I was 35, even in '85, there were certainly plenty of moments where I felt like, okay, this is too much now, you know. But you have the stories and the maps of the people that came before, and they guide you in some fashion. Whether it was Elvis or Bob Dylan or anybody, from one-hit wonders to, you know, you have something you can guide yourself by, but there's a moment when you got to start to write your own, you know. And I think that so you know you're trying to see, there's an exhilaration of having the opportunity to write your own story in some fashion, you know.
Well, that's what you're saying about Badlands. You've been quoted of saying about Badlands that you start to come to an understanding about your own songwriting.
Yeah, well, I think that at that point, after we had the initial burst of success, you know, and it was, a lot of it was positive, but it was somewhat controversial too, because people didn't know where I came from, and the record company at the time was laying it on hot and heavy,
Mm.
and you know, and there was a lot of, you know, where did somebody, you know, it was a creation of the record company and something. It was just the normal stuff that everybody goes through to some degree. But I think that at that time, when you have the tremendous, like I said, the arrogance and the ego to believe that, hey, yeah, I should be there, you know, that's because I'm going to, you know, and at the same time you feel, you know, you do feel a certain sort of like things, you're worried that things could, you're worried your very own, that you could lose yourself ultimately, you know, because you saw people do it before you.
Sure.
And I think you stand, that's your fundamental concern, whether you're going to in some way be damaged. If at the time it feels maybe irreparably, you know, and the thing that matters to you the very most be misused, abused, misrepresented. I think every artist struggles for the control over his work to some degree, but at some point it does have a life of its own, and then you are forced to react. And how well you react at a certain point becomes a big part of whatever your story is going to be, you know.
After the Darkness sessions and after the Born sessions and the success of that, you being so close to your family, to your mum and your dad, how did they feel at this stage? I mean, your dad that wanted to get your hair cut a long time ago and kept saying get a decent job, get into the army.
Well, the funny thing is, my folks moved to California when I was 19,
Right.
and I stayed in New Jersey, and because I had the band and lived with the band, and so all throughout the beginning part of my musical, the first 2 or 3 records, particularly in the beginning, nobody had the money to visit or even phone that much. So there was a period where, you know, I was distant from my folks, and also you're creating yourself in some fashion, and you're kind of leading this very sort of stripped down existence and very, very intense focus. And my main concern, I think, certainly after the Born to Run record, was, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Like, what do you do? You got what you were moving towards, so now what do you do? And I think at that point I began to develop more of a self-conscious philosophy about the type of music I wanted to make, what I wanted to write about, who I wanted to give voice to, and that was going to really set the course for a good part of the rest of my career. You know, I wanted my music to be about real issues, feel like it was about real lives, and I wanted to be exhilarating and provide entertainment, but I wanted to feel like it was grounded in what people were experiencing on some daily basis, and not be set in the fantastical or in some fashion, you know. So that at that point, that was really with the beginning of Darkness. And I went through some bad times, and I couldn't record for quite a while, and I got in the classic sort of lawsuit, just music business lawsuit. And so a long period went where I was back in New Jersey, in the bars, and basically writing, you know, sort of my redemption music in some fashion. And that was the record where I really set my sights on. I said, well, gee, everybody is kind of, when they've gotten to a certain place, they've turned this way. Well, what happens? I want to try and turn this way, you know. And what happens if? And I think previously I hadn't really thought that much about my past, my family life growing up, my roots that much. But after we had that initial success, I grabbed onto those things for all it was worth, because I felt those were the things that were going to make me different, and that were going to ground me in a way that I wanted my music to remain in ideals and values that I wanted my music to remain grounded in. And then I started to write very purposefully about the issues that I started on Darkness, you know, hometown, family, you know, a lot of the conflicts and the limitations of just real life. You know?
Well, coming out of then the Darkness sessions, which were in '77, we go to track 4 on the album, which is in the River sessions, which is '79-80, and you say the River, the song itself, you consider this a breakthrough song for you.
Yeah, I went home. I was listening to a lot of Hank Williams.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Hank Williams, and which, you know, it was really, my late 20s was all of a sudden country music became really important, and particularly Hank Williams, because the writing was so great, imagery was so stark, dramatic, just raw, and I wanted to write, I wanted to use the classic, just the classic images, classic American images. I wanted to, you know, initially I wanted to write the Cars. It was great rock music, the Cars, the Girls, Saturday Night. I wanted my music to address, I wanted to address all those things in my own way. But then I also wanted to include the country, you know, the country references and a sense of geography, the sense of the geography of the country. I wanted to provide a sense of location, a sense of place that the characters would grow out of. And I think that somebody asked me the difference between rock and roll and country music. Well, rock and roll was Saturday night. Country music was Sunday morning. You know, rock and roll was a freedom, and come Sunday, you're left with the consequences. You know, so freedom always has its consequences, and the price you're going to pay for it, right? And so I wanted my music to be both the Saturday night. I wanted that exhilaration, that freedom of spirit. But I wanted the consequences too. I wanted to address that these things all have a price, you know, if you can even get to them. And then I also wanted the Monday through Friday. I wanted the work week, because that's where people spend so much of their time. And I wanted to try and develop a vocabulary and a body of work that would address the whole thing, you know.
Right. Well, I mean, out of that, you've got 2 tracks on this on the greatest hits, The River and Hungry Heart. And I mean, The River's a great track. Hungry Heart was the track that became.
That was just like my big hit single. You know? That was sort of, that was like. I mean, we put that on. Well, it was a single. Like we tried to make a singles collection, but also, to me, it was like a Frankie Lyman song or something you'd hear come popping out of the radio in the middle of the summer. The harmonies and the sound kind of just sparkling in a certain way, and because as much as I was influenced like by Dylan or Elvis, or it was all the garage bands, all the one-hit wonders, a little bit of soul, Liar Liar, you know, but there was all kinds of Question Mark and the Mysterians. There were so many bands that came up, you know, that had one hit, disappeared, made a great record. And, you know, I loved that whole world of pop music. And so that was sort of, I initially wrote the song for the Ramones, which was unusual, because I met the Ramones in Asbury Park on a Friday night, and they said, write us a song. And I guess I had some idea of trying to write them a single, you know, because I probably wouldn't have written it for myself, you know, wouldn't have said, oh, it's not, you know, whatever, it's too pop sounding or something. So I think I had an idea of trying to write a single for them, and I went home and I wrote that song, and I played it for John, and he said, no, we better keep that one. And it ended up being, it was kind of enjoyable. It ended up being like the first real sort of like, you know, smash record or something. And I, as a kid, I followed the charts really closely, you know, and in my bed at night, listing all the top 20, and so it was kind of, it made me a little nervous, but it was also fun to be part of that particular world. You know? So
it actually did give you sort of quite a buzz to hear it on radio and watch it on the chart.
That's one of my favorite things. I still love to hear something, particularly something new that you did when it first comes on the radio. It's like, you know, that was the most subversive, subversive aspect of suburban life at the time. You know, I think we lived in a little town. Nobody went anywhere. They never knew anybody who went anywhere. People went anywhere, they didn't come back. You know? And so your entire and television was very, very conservative at the time. There were no kids on television, on TV at all, you know, except for the most bizarrely sanitized, you know, versions of, and so you knew it wasn't real, and so there was the radio, and the radio kept pumping in all these very subversive. The music was subversive. It made people think different. It made you behave differently. It made you want to be something different. It filled you with a certain kind of vitality that can be tremendously positive, but it can be dangerous too. You know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that was something that Top 40 radio provided a tremendous service. I think that all the kids out in the little towns across the country at the time, so it was something to hear my own stuff on.
When you're saying that you wrote this song and you wouldn't have normally written it perhaps for yourself, another song off that album, which I think is still totally relative to today, is Out in the Street, which was on that session. That's as close as for me as I've ever gotten to sort of Beatles structures, you know. It's a great song.
I tended to be more, as I developed my own music, I moved a little more towards probably folk-based structures in some fashion, you know. But after Born to Run, at Born to Run, I was very involved I was influenced by the Roy Orbison records, which developed operatically and segmentally, you know, in sections, and the sections weren't repeated, and everything led to a crescendo, and I wanted to create that kind of drama. But after that, that was when right around Darkness, I began to be more influenced by the country music, which came out of the fundamental folk-based rhythms, folk-based simpler music. I wanted to speak more with the everyday speaking voice. I wanted less of the wild imagery. I was interested in more plain talk and communicating like that. So, but
well, if you take that song and then look at the streets, not only of America today, but of everywhere, I mean, how do you perceive it, please?
I don't know. To me, that song was just, it was more about I was trying to do a rewrite of Friday on My Mind, actually, the Easy Beats record, which was one of my favorite records of all time. At the moment, it was like, the structure of that thing was incredible, you know, and the exhilaration when they broke into the chorus. And it had that, hey, Friday, you're out of school, you're out of work, you're out there. You know, in my town, there was a particular town you'd drive to on the weekend, and the streets were filled with teenagers, you know. And so, me, I was trying to write more about that feeling of just getting out of your job, getting out of, you know, whatever you were doing Monday through Friday, and then meeting your friends downtown somewhere, or out in the street someplace, and a sense of just companionship, you know, a sense of companionship and exhilaration of that kind of friendship. And so, but it was sort of, the music was as Beatles structured as I ever got, I guess, you know, because it had quite a few more changes and things, and some harmonies, yeah.
All right, now coming out of the River sessions, and then we go into track 6 on the Greatest Hits album, from the 1982 Nebraska sessions. Now here is an artist, major now, and I mean today it's the norm where people, you know, young bands who can't afford studios do it at home. The Nebraska sessions, which included Atlantic City, were basically done in your home, weren't they?
That was done because I got tired of going in the studio and blowing, you know, so much money on things that I ended up not using. And we were learning how to make records, and so we'd spend enormous amounts of time making mistakes, you know, just endlessly. And it got really frustrating to work on something for 2 or 3 days and not pull it off, you know. So at some point I said, I'm not going to go in until I know the songs are good. And because the band would play so well that I think we'd have something, and then I'd try to write words to it, and I'd either be unable to, and we'd just, you know, blew 3 or 4 days in the studio. So really it came about as me, I wanted focus myself with the songs that I had, and if I could perform them by myself, I figured they'd work in the studio. So we ended up getting this very small Tascam 4-track tape recorder that had just come out, and I had 2 mics. I was in my bedroom, and I recorded the whole thing in 2 or 3 days, you know, a couple of takes each. Some of the songs only once. And then we mixed it through as I said, through the Gibson Echo unit onto a beat box, which was like playing too fast. And I just carried it around. It was just my demo, and eventually, you know, I didn't think anything about it until we started to try and
record it in the studio.
And everything we did wasn't, you know, it came out, it just didn't work, you know. It didn't work with the band, and it didn't work in a professional recording studio because it sounded too good.
You soloed it as well in a recording studio as well after that, didn't you?
Excuse me? I didn't...
You soloed it as well.
Yeah, then I gave up with the band,
yeah.
And I said, well, okay, well, I'm just gonna, this is an acoustic record, but it sounds so weird that I'm gonna try and re-record it. And I tried to re-record it, and then the better it got, the worse it got. You know, the better it sounded, the worse it was. And at some point I said, everything that happened, however that happened, that's what happened. That
often happens with demos, though. Sometimes demos do sound better than the original. With a lot
Most of the time, probably. You know, it's something where the things that you usually go into the studio to improve upon, you should probably leave alone a good part of the time. You know, but that's why I started recording my house a lot. I've made a lot of records at home. My recording setup has gotten a lot more sophisticated, but the moment of creation you can capture when you're teaching something to somebody, when you're doing it the first time for yourself, when your mind is disengaged, when you're calling on only your instincts and the craft that you've learned, and it's just the most direct and very often the most honest thing that you can come across with. So I devoted myself to having that type of recording setup after that.
All right, so when then, though, that wasn't the norm to do that, what was the reaction when then you and John decided, damn it, we'll take this in,
well,
this is it?
Well, it was kind of weird. We just had this, the most successful record we ever had, you know, and we actually had a hit which we'd never had before, and, you know, it'd been 10 years on, you know, we'd been recording for 10 years, and so all of a sudden, those songs were meant to be part of just the Born in the USA album. Originally, it was only going to be one album, and it was going to be all part of the USA record. And of course, then we went in. We realized, you know, I ended up making this unusual recording. And so, what do we do? Because we've tried to put it on the wax. When we tried to actually get it on a record, there was something about it that was so strange, recorded so that it wouldn't go on a record, you know. There were no CDs, so all we had was the cassette. And so we said, well, we're just going to have to put this out on just a cassette, which, like, nobody was doing at all at the time, you know, which we were ready to do. And then finally, after a long process, Charlie Plotkin somehow found some old equipment, old mastering equipment, and ended up, they figured out how to get it on. But it was down to the wire. You know, it was really, and so then we brought it to the record companies. They were going, okay, where? And I gotta salute the guys at my record company, because, you know, I said, well, gee, you know, this is it. This is my music right now. And really, they were tremendous. They just said, well, okay. And hey, all we want you to do is to do your job on it. And they did. They took the record. They were tremendously supportive. I probably have had the unusual experience of getting the tremendous support and the right kind of support from my record company for almost my entire, you know, the entire time I've been recording. So at the time it was Walter Yetnikoff and Al Teller, and they played it for them, and they took it and they treated it just like any other, you know. I mean, I didn't do any. At the time I went back to work on the Born in the USA record, and the record came out, and it got on the radio a little bit, not much. I didn't expect it to get on the radio very much, and but it had an impact on the people that heard it.
Well, certainly, I mean, like, what would be fans or whatever, loved the Nebraska. I mean, they just really loved it. I loved it. I mean, Atlantic City alone. And it's good to see that it stays simple like that, you know, even in performance.
Yeah, and, you know, I guess once again, I was trying to continue sort of thematically. I was reading a lot of Flannery O'Connor, and I was watching. There were a couple of movies out at the time that had a tone that I liked. A movie killed by Terrence Malick, Badlands.
Mm-hmm.
It was a picture with Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek, based on the Charlie Starkweather murders that occurred. The first sort of modern, the thing that occurs all over the world now, but that modern media, natural-born killers. You know,
Yeah.
the real natural-born killers. And so yeah, I was watching sort of these very minimalist type pictures and atmospheric movies and reading, and it all sort of worked its way into the tone of the music, along with some of the things that like I said, at the time the country was swinging to the right, and I was interested in our band sort of providing an alternative, or just giving voice to some other ideas, and not in any ideological fashion, because the record was not. I didn't sit down and have any particular political motivation in mind, but I was interested in just telling those stories, those particular people's stories.
Well, certainly during that time, and you were talking about sort of Dylan before Nirvana, with their songwriting. You left yourself out there, which is very modest, but that's when you were starting to have a major influence.
Great false modesty I've perfected over the
That's very good. But I mean, did you feel that you were having an influence then? Not only on the American
I don't
culture,
know. I think that I felt that the main thing I was interested in was just having an opportunity to, you know, and you know, we did a lot of different types of work at the time in '85 when we traveled around, and I met a lot of different people from a lot of different community groups, and you had a forum where you simply could shine a light on people that were doing good work within the the audience's hometown, and you just gave people the options to participate or not in some fashion, you know, and at the same time, like I said, give voice to sort of a different vision of my country than was given voice to by the people who were in power at the time. So I just try to make it as, to me, some of the implications of, you know, it's sort of this divisive. People believe that, you know, some of the implications of popular music, of the fundamental essence of the early rock and roll music, you know, the music had some sort of political implications, and I think I was, in my own way, I was trying to find my way through it. I never liked things that were real ideological. I didn't like somebody preaching at me. I didn't think that there wasn't a place for it in my music, but I was trying to find a way to deal thematically with things that were just sort of everyday concerns, and in some fashion, I had a big audience at that time, and I was able to, in an attempt to give, you know, to provide some alternate vision, you know, which we were sort of semi-successful at sometimes.
Well, more than that. Out of the Nebraska sessions in 82 I should say, and then 82, 84, with the Born in the USA sessions, which then, I don't know, it's another era, I feel, of Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band.
Well, that was sort of, you know, the moment when we were kind of messing with the rules of the game. We had a chance to sort of, you know, it was a moment. Like I said, it was very few, you know, musicians you come on where you have the opportunity to sort of be definitive at a certain moment, to sort of reset some of the rules of the game, maybe you know, carve out your own bit of the playing field. You know, I think at that time, and I was, you know, I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't know that anything like that was going to happen. I knew that I'd written a song that was it felt like a powerful song, you know, and I felt that it was going to communicate. I didn't know that the whole thing was going to kind of roll the way it rolled, and so it was probably the single most, in some way, challenging, one of the most challenging moments in certainly in my work life, you know,
right.
my work life, and it was sort of what happened in '75 happened in '85 again, you know, and it was both. Even though I'd gotten quite a bit older and I was, you know, I was able to deal with it much in a more sane and stable fashion, and it didn't frighten me as much. It still was a time when you felt like you really had to be on your toes, you know.
Well, I mean, here's a musician who is writing about a lot of things in family life in America, of American culture, who doesn't politically want to get involved and didn't, but politicians are taking it on now, you know. Did that?
Well, it wasn't. It was sort of.
I mean,
I was trying to find my own. I think that was disorienting at the time, and at the time, I wished I'd actually. It was the only time when I think it was a moment when I actually felt that I wished I'd have stayed in school.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean like as an alternate choice of occupation, but
Yeah.
I wish that I'd had more education about history, and just. I mean, I studied quite a bit at the time myself, you know, and because I was trying. I wasn't sure what I was trying to do, you know, exactly, but you realize that once you set something loose, it has a life of its own.
Sure.
There was a party that was in power at the time, had basically co-opted everything that was American.
Mm.
The right had co-opted. If it was the flag, it belonged to the right. If it was Mom's apple pie, was only by Republicans, and everybody else was the other. You know, the
Yeah.
outsider. You're spoiling the party, you know. You're not invited to you don't even get a chance to spoil it. You're not invited to the party. And, you know, so that was the only thing that I thought I wanted to do in my own music was I wanted to claim my own flag, you know, both,
Sure.
you know, and put forth maybe, more so in the shows. The records, I think, you make the records before you're even sometimes consciously aware of what you're writing about, you know. But certainly when we went out and performed, I wanted to stake my own claim to those images, to those things that I felt were mine by birthright and that I wanted a part of, you know. And that all of this is not the other, you know. It's and somehow, like I said, give voice to some alternative vision of what the country could be about, or maybe should be about, or maybe, you know, was meant to be about at its in the beginning, and just try to find, you know, just present some other vision of what, because that's all you were at the time here in the States. You know, it was very jingoistic, you know, and I wanted but you know, you get mixed up in the whole thing, and people, you know, it was pretty. It was a pretty intense time, you know. It was a pretty intense time.
Being an outsider, not being an American, it's always fascinated me to find and see a black American, Hispanic American, Korean American, whatever, of how proud they are to be American when the national anthem or the flag, more so perhaps than a lot of other countries have. It's, you know, American one for all. I mean, it's.
Actually, the Australians do pretty good with that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it fascinates me to see how it all comes together when, you know, under the national anthem or whatever.
Well,
and Born in the USA seemed to have that pride, you know.
Yeah,
certainly from you anyway.
I think it did have that in it, and in some sense maybe that was part of why some people misinterpreted some of it, you know. I think there was along with the criticism, and along with the attempt to, you know, there was the sense of the character's pride and determination to, you know, to make his presence felt and to claim a part of that for himself.
Well, that's where I think you got the feeling with that song, that no matter what you weren't the other side. You were American and you were part of that.
Yeah.
It was yours as much as anyone else's, be
Yeah,
the Republican or whatever.
But those, it's tricky. Those issues are so, they're they're dynamite, you
Yeah.
know, and they're constantly being abused. What goes on when you start the jingoistic type of flag waving and nationalism, which is is very, very, very destructive, you know, and it is, you know, that was. It's those there's so many gray areas where, you know, you could stumble and so there was a lot of that running through the country at the time, and I was you know, putting in my 2 cents to claim some of those things, both for myself, because that's how I felt, and for, you know, I created a body of work of characters that gave they had a voice, you know, a voice to. And so I was just trying to sort of I think that what you had a character that the Vietnam veteran that was in the song. He comes home and is tremendously disillusioned. The entire system failed him in some fashion. Right.
And the same in Australia.
And I met quite a few of the Australian vets when we were down there in '84, you know. And so he comes home, he's disillusioned, he feels betrayed. And so now he's searching for some America that he can lay claim to. But that's founded in I don't know, maybe some different set of values or a different set of ideals. He's just trying to find one little spot of sort of honest ground, a little bit to just begin on, and really the song is basically it's about the survival, and I think that the pride in it is that was the intent of the thrust of it musically, was I wanted it just to be. He's trying to find he has to create some country for himself now, and it wasn't the one that was being painted in the popular media in the '80s in the States, you know. So.
Nor in Australia, and certainly in both countries, the song gave a new pride to those people, certainly to the the Vietnam veterans, and it was a breakthrough. It was a definite breakthrough for people learning to understand them a lot more, and understanding what it was about, and that they weren't outcasts, you know, which was just terrible, really.
I met some guys here, you know. Initially, there was, when the vets came back to the States, you know, the only organization that existed was the VFW, and Veterans of Foreign Wars, and for veterans from Korea, and so there was you had a whole new generation of people that didn't have that much in common with those guys, and they took a lot, you know, they took a lot of shit of coming back, you know, losers, this, that. I mean, it was, and so I met this fellow Bobby Muller who said the Vietnam veterans, they need an organization of their own, you know, and he was in the process of starting up the Vietnam Veterans of America, which he came to the show and said, hey, you know, we help me get the ball rolling in some fashion, you know, and so I got to know him a little bit, and some other guys, just Ron Kovic, the fellow who wrote the book Born on the 4th of July, who I bumped into by accident in California in a little motel. You know, he was sitting by the side of the pool, and we just started talking, and it's funny because I read the book a couple of months ago, and he said, oh, I'm Ron Kovic. I said, Ron Kovic. You know, and I said, yeah, you know, I wrote this book. I said, I just read it, and so sort of, you know, coming in contact with a lot of those guys was, and it was a song I was always afraid of getting it wrong, and it was I was an outsider, you know, I didn't know anything about that experience, and it was such a profound, shaping experience for everybody that I met who went through it. I was really, really concerned with trying to get it right. So.
Well, also from that session is track 7, Dancing in the Dark, which I've got to tell you, the video had me fooled for a long, long time. I'm in television.
Me too.
It was a great song, and certainly a great video. A very clever video, you know.
Oh, I don't know how clever it was, you know. I sort of showed up and it happened, but it was funny. I think it was like that was, except for Atlantic City, that was our first video. I kind of went dragging and screaming into the video thing. I really didn't want to do it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed to become part of the job at the time, and so it was a funny song. The whole thing of the song was we did the whole Born in the USA record, and John Landau comes by and says, "Oh, we don't have a hit. We don't have a hit." And I don't care if we have a hit. You know, well, you write it. We had a big argument about it, and I sat around that night and I ended up writing that particular song. But it was a song that was written with sort of being like a big hit. You know, with the idea of like something that comes on the radio and just like a smash record or something, and but yet in a funny way also, it was probably one of the most personal songs on the whole album in some ways, because I was actually writing about me for the most part and how I was feeling at the time, and it was a record that later on I said, oh, you know, I don't know about that one, you know, it's a little just too pop. I'm not so sure about that, you know, but. I played it the other day. It sounded pretty good. You know, it was a funny sort of. John and I, we have our yearly pop rock arguments around it. You know.
But it also helped set the theme, I think, for the 84-85 Born in the USA tour of the new audience that came in.
That it did, because there were people that heard us then that I'd never seen before.
Well, you can even see it, you know, in Australian audiences and in American audiences, because I went to quite a few concerts where you do your set and you'd see, well, that's before Born in the USA. Now here comes the Born in the USA audience, and you'd see them combine from the Bruce Springsteen fans from way back to them, and they combined together. It was great.
They left right after that too. So
no,
I haven't seen them since.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. But that certainly set the theme for it, didn't it?
It was pretty different in the sense that all of a sudden I saw there was a lot of really young kids. I think it was just all different kinds of people, and people who, which I liked. You know, I wanted, you know, it was a tour where I'd been recording for 13 or 14 years and playing for like 20 some at the time, and so it was when I went out and I looked at the audience, it's like, hey, I wanted to see, hey, there were guys that came and saw me 10 years earlier, and they had their kids on their shoulders with them, and you know, it was sort of, it was a pretty interesting, it was a different time, you know, and I always wanted our band to be about, I mean, I wanted it to be both a vessel of ideas and a story that you could tell that people would take into their own lives and would be useful, that would hopefully be intellectually stimulating in some fashion, that would give them a sense of a different perspective on where they lived, what the issues were in their own lives and in the communities that they lived in. But I also always wanted our band to be a party and entertainment. I wanted people to come out and be entertained when they came and saw us, and a lot of people, I think, came out for that at that particular.
Well, I think it achieved both. I think that you had your audience already, but the audience that in Born in the USA with Dancing in the Dark, then track 8, which we covered, Born in the USA, gave your audience, a young audience, entertainment for what they wanted, something to think about, and they did think about it. My Hometown, another track off that album, which is dealing with the issues we talked about with governments, etc. So it really was a very strong record in many respects, apart from the fact that it was a major hit. Glory Days, another particular track off that.
That was just a story. That just happened. I just met a guy from school. I was going in this little bar one night, and he was coming out, and we went, boom, hey. and we sat down and the song basically the song happened, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, it was just one of those. It was easy, just kind of flying out.
Is it true in Glory Days that there was actually a verse which then you never used?
No.
No?
No, not to my knowledge. I don't know. You may know. You know more about this stuff than I do. I think. I don't think I. No, I only remember those 3 verses.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh well, I'll have to correct that. The Tunnel of Love sessions, then '87. We've got to rush through this because we're.
Sure.
Brilliant Disguise, which is track 11 off the Tunnel of Love sessions.
That was just.
I love this album.
That was a record where I think after '85, I wanted to stop and sort of take stock of what I'd been through and where I felt I was successful or where I felt I might have failed or in some fashion. I needed to sort of regroup and just sort of, I was interested in sort of just reintroducing myself to the fans. It's just, I just want to be a songwriter. You know? But at the same time, there was a lot of issues in my own life I hadn't sorted out, and I think that I wanted to write about men and women, which is something I hadn't written about previously very much. And I wanted to try and write about those things in a way that I felt hadn't been written, you know, in pop music that much. It's sort of a lot of the romantic pop songs that I like. I mean, Bob's romantic music was always very complex, and you know, and Dylan's music was always very fundamentally adult because he came out of the folk tradition. You know, but I think that so I wanted to sort of write this very adult sort of love songs and things that dealt with the real kinds of compromises and issues that you run into when you're trying to have a real relationship with somebody. And I recorded it in my garage apartment, you know, in about a week or so. I think a couple.
Well, originally you started off in Los Angeles with it, right? And then moved.
No. Went to L.A. I had a little house in the Hollywood Hills, and I went out there in the winter of. I would always go out there a couple of months in the winter, and I had a record that. Let me see, when was it? There was a series of songs that I wrote, sort of. I guess maybe it might have been after Born in the USA, before Tunnel of Love, that I did record in my garage apartment in Los Angeles, and so those are songs that never saw the light of day. They're sort of sitting around. But then I went back. When I went back, so I didn't really start this record there. When I started this record when I went back east and set up in my garage apartment there and recorded in New Jersey, and recorded there.
Okay, well then we move on to the Human Touch sessions in 1990. Now these were recorded over a period of when basically your children were born.
Yeah, that was music that I guess that's right, when we were having all our kids.
Yeah.
And
so it took a fair bit of time, this one, right?
Yeah, I took quite a bit of time off.
Because Evan was born.
Yeah, after our Tunnel of Love tour, you know, I was going through all my personal problems, and I took a lot of time off to just sort out what I was doing, you know, and where I was going. Like I said, I felt like I had a lot of success in my work, but I was just completely confused otherwise. And so I took about a year there, and then I began to record just because I didn't have songs that much, just because I felt like I wanted to go work again. But it was really a time, the whole period was really almost like a hiatus, you know, where I was involved. Once again, I was just sort of trying to center myself and create a life that I had never had off stage, one that would be, you know, that would work and you know, that was meaningful, and I think that we just sort of ended up somehow starting into those sessions just as sort of, well, let's book the studio. And
well, Ray was with you then, right?
Roy was, but he happened to be he was in Los Angeles, and I went over his house one day, and played me some tracks he'd written, and one of them was Roll of the Dice, and so that's how basically I recorded a little bit on my own, but that's pretty much how that record started.
The former Street, David came back.
He came in and he played on some things. He was around, and it was
It was the first time you got together again.
Well, it was the opportunity that I wanted, where I was kind of had the exhilaration of working with the different musicians, and so anybody I could bring different people in and play, and Davey was around, and Davey was always a great player, and so he came in and played a little bit, and we just kind of worked away at it, chipped away at it, and until we came to something that felt was releasable,
Right, well, after Human Touch, you've got the Lucky Town sessions, and it was amazing how all this, I mean, you've got...
Well, that was all mixed together, you know, because what happened is I was trying to write one last song for Human Touch, and it ended up being Living Proof, but it sounded completely different to me, and so I said, well, and then all of a sudden, in about a week, or 2 weeks at most, I wrote all those other songs.
Within that 2-week period?
Yeah, I think what happened is on Human Touch, we had a very sort of controlled recording process, and it was something where we went back to doing it, and it was just very much a studio record. And by the end of it, I was unsure, I was unsure about some of it, and so I think the Lucky Town record, in a funny way, was partly it was a reaction to having spent all that time in the studio. I went over in my house, I just set the stuff up, I grabbed my acoustic guitar, and I just started to play the songs, and so that was a record that developed, in a month literally after I finished the Human Touch record, and so we ended up sitting there with 2 records.
So you've got like Human Touch on this greatest hits, then you've got Better Days.
Right.
Which is a really happy song. I mean, it's a good...
Yeah, that's it's nice to be able to write those once in a while,
and it was during that time, after those 2 albums released at the same time, that I had the chance to see you on tour at the Bercy in Paris. And I remember it was a really stinking hot night. I mean, it was so hot. And I thought, oh boy, I think we all sort of think, God, man, go to the concert. This concert went for 4 hours, and I never thought I'd be able to bear the heat. I don't know how you bared it down there, but it was a fantastic concert where after 4 hours you're still screaming for more, even though you sweated your life away, I think, I mean, I reckon that was a great concert. Did you enjoy doing those concerts? I mean, it was without E Street Band.
Oh, yeah, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that tour a lot, very, very much, and particularly the European segment. We had a really good time. The people are really interesting people. The musicians I found were not only were they great players, they were really nice people, and the band came from all different kinds of backgrounds. There were rock musicians, Shane, Zach was the guy who started playing R&B, and then had a 3-piece, very heavy metal band, and we had one woman was a gospel singer. She was in her 50s. A couple of women were gospel singers. One was a pop singer. Bobby King was a soul singer. Tommy Sims came up with a funk background, and so you had all of these disparate people in one place, and we'd get on the bus and we'd switch the beatbox around, and everybody would play the records that they grew up with, and so you were exposed to all different types of music, and it was just a really stimulating sort of thing. It was the kind of thing I was looking for when I wanted to get involved with some other musicians, and I wanted musicians that the thing with me and the E Street fellows, our backgrounds were all relatively, very common, and that's what made that strong. And I think I wanted to do something where people really came from different places musically and geographically, and see how that worked together. So I enjoyed it.
I mean, just on that particular concert, I mean, I remember when you toured Australia and you did a Sydney concert, you did 32 songs one night, Yeah. And
it was probably too long. Show was probably
it was fantastic. But I mean, the Paris concert, I say, it was so hot, and yet I mean, here you are doing 4 hours. I mean, I know you look fit and you are fit, but boy, I mean, that's...
I don't know, you know, you get up there, sometimes when it's really hot, I mean, there's a, you know, it's like, you think you're gonna fall. You know, sometimes I like it really hot because it's just, I don't know, it greases the wheels, man. Everybody gets all slippery and starts smashing together, and the sweat's flying, and to me that's what it was about. That to me that was. I mean, I used to love to see those performers sweat. I just, man, you know, with the great soul performers, I used to love to see the sweat come off them. You know, it was like, you know, my thing was never, it wasn't a cool thing. You know, what my music wasn't coming from like a cool place. And
But does it ever get to a point where that, I mean, you're up there and, I mean, totally into it, and the audience are totally into it, where the band think, oh my God.
Maybe for the drummer sometimes. I don't know.
We're up to about 3.5 hours now, and everyone's still charging on.
Everybody's pretty used to it at that point. You know, there's an initial little bit of a break-in, but I think you learn, you know, all the guys, you learn how to sort of conserve your energy.
All right, so we've gone through better days. Track 14, I'll rush now. Streets of Philadelphia we spoke about.
Right.
But what a fantastic song.
Thanks.
To a fantastic film. You were asked to write this song. Neil Young wrote a song as well. I believe they were looking for a rock and roll song. And
they wanted a rock song, and I ended up, you know, writing the ballad because it was the only thing that made musical sense when I recorded it in my house in New Jersey, basically, and it was just what worked. And so and also I'd seen the piece of film that he wanted the song to play over, and it just created a certain. It introduced you to the character before the movie actually began, and created a certain sort of, I don't know, it had a way of working with the images that he showed me. So
now we discussed earlier in the interview about, like, you know, Born to Run and the initial success and how that frightened you perhaps, and you weren't sure how everything was going to fit. Born in the USA 10 years later, you know, Time magazine, Newsweek, and that seemed weird to you as well, maybe.
Well, it's all weird on some level.
Yeah.
That experience, you pursue it, and you have to, or else you wouldn't end up there in some fashion. You know, I always pretty much did what I wanted to do, but you know, you end up there, so there's nobody to blame but you. You know, so you should. I mean, you know, it like I said, it can feel treacherous, and it is treacherous to some degree. But also, it is a place where many wonderful things happen, and you get to fulfill your life stream of communicating with people, and watching the work that you've done and your life's work have impact on other people's lives. You know, so it's in the end it's a good deal, but it can be a strange ride. You know?
I mean, even with the Time and Newsweek thing, I mean, I don't know if the story's true where you and Steve went down to Memphis and Gracelands and
that was
jumped
a whole
over
other
the fence.
thing. Let's not get into that.
But I mean, like, there must be some fun come out of it where you can identify and say, well, at least I'm...
You mean out of...
Well, having to sort of settle the line, something or other when
it was the only time I ever tried to pull that one, you know. Yeah, it was embarrassing, but I did it. It was really embarrassing, you know.
What I want to ask you about Streets of Philadelphia, a great song. It means so much to a lot of people. Do you still get, I'll use the word buzz again, to get an Academy Award for it, to get Grammys for that? Because it deserves it.
Because when you're a kid, you know, we grew up in the States watching the Academy Awards, and every year, you know, you sat in front of the TV. And so it was fun on that level. I mean, when it comes to giving those any type of award to say something is best, I mean, that's not the way that music or any art works. I think everybody knows that. It's sort of like I guess it ends up being sort of some big kind of pat on the back in some fashion, but it was thrilling. It was a lot of fun.
Right, there's 4 tracks to go. Secret Garden, which you performed the other night. Yeah, that's a beautiful song. I believe that is going to be a single.
I think so, yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful song. I love it.
Yeah, that was just, you know, more sort of trying to write about the strangeness and the complexities of relationships, you know. And you know, that basic, it sort of it had something to do with, it connected back maybe to like Brilliant Disguise and the issues of the difficulty it takes any two people to really get to know one another, because you have to let down your defenses, your fears, and that's always frightening to do. People don't like to do it. But that's where everything lies, you know.
We've got to run because the tape's going on.
You're going to get a tremendous beating from these women when you're done.
All right.
I got a feeling.
Murder Incorporated.
That's all I
Which is, well, there have been so many versions of that, and this is a remix for people who've been crying
That
out
was
for it.
basically a remix of just something we did back in probably '82, you know.
Yeah.
But we talked about it before, so.
Yeah. Okay. Blood Brothers.
Just wrote that before the sessions, just kind of trying to get a handle on the issues of friendship and how it all, the strange ways it goes around, you know, goes around and comes around.
And the final track, This Hard Land. Just recorded recently, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, we cut that in the city, but I'd written the song probably 10 years ago, and that was, once again, it was this, that was kind of, it was part of actually the Born in the USA sessions, in the sense that it I think as you get older, your battle as you become an adult, I think, is a sort of an uphill battle against cynicism and despair, you know. You see people come in and come out of the government. You don't see things change that much. You see yourself in just, you know, evolve in ways you just never thought you would, you know, and doing things you were terrified of or said you'd never be doing, you know. And that song sort of, I was just trying to express a certain sort of, the imagery is basically, it's kind of Fordian, you know, John Ford, some of it's Western imagery, but it's basically a song about friendship, about trying to find your place, about trying to once again find and create some space, some place, some country, some neighborhood, some, you know, that you feel you can live in, you know, but mainly also it was a big song about friendship, you know, companionship.
Well, I got to tell you, it's been an absolute blowout for me to do this
thing.
interview. I'm the greatest fan. But for a person that has given a lot of enjoyment, you and the East Street Band, I mean, there's heaps of tracks I could have put on there, Jungle Land, etc. But a person who...
Okay, what did you want on the thing that... I'm going to interview him now. What would you put on the thing that wasn't on there?
Oh, many tracks, many tracks.
Give me a few.
Well, I would have liked, as I said before, I would have liked to have seen some tracks off the first two albums, but as you said, they weren't singles, you know.
Yeah. Actually, they were, but
in the sense of what you're saying,
I can't
it's
even
single.
explain it. All right. Anyway.
Nice to meet you.
Nice
and
to see you.
The other thing I'm very proud to say is that I've met someone that has kept his integrity, and as a songwriter and as a performer, and I hope you're doing your album very soon.
Yeah, I'm gonna be working on it.
And back on the road again.
You know, and we gotta get back down there too. So next time.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Well, you're a workout man. Good Lord. Holy shit. All right.